What's up guys, I am BlackOpsAmazing. Welcome back to another zombies video where today we are looking at the story of the Shadow Man. If you want to check out the whole series on the story of our characters for Call of Duty Zombies, make sure you check out each and every video down in the description. We literally have so many so far, I believe 20, maybe even 30 story of videos, and there's still a ton of more characters to actually cover. So as always, if you're enjoying this series, if you want me to keep it up, make sure you leave a like rating. Let me know in the comment section below who you want to see next. Make sure you are subscribed if you haven't already, and click that little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. But anyway, without further ado, thank you all for the support. Here we go. Back in the very beginning, years and years before the creation of Earth, there was only the Keeper and the Ethers. Among them were two beings known as Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man. These two beings were friends. In fact, Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man were good friends. They were the only two beings to exist at that time, so were very close. Dr. Monty described the Shadow Man as being a bloke who was the sweetest, most charming individual he had ever met. He said he was funny too. They used to have a good laugh together, but as we know, things soon changed. That was when, one day, the Keepers began to experiment with a small infected part of the ether. This was known as the Dark Ether. Some of the Keepers began to experiment with this, and this Dark Ether then began to corrupt and corrode the Keepers' souls, turning these Keepers evil. And among them was the Shadow Man. The Dark Ether corrupted the Shadow Man's mind, and soon enough, he turned evil along with these corrupted Keepers. A divide of power then broke out between the corrupted and uncorrupted Keepers, and so the War of Argotha began. The Shadow Man and the corrupted Keepers waged war on the normal Keepers, but soon enough, facing defeat, the evil is defeated and banished to the Dark Ether beneath creation. And from then on, the Keepers took the mantle of the Guardians. With the corrupted Keepers and the Shadow Man now trapped in the Dark Ether, over time they began to contort, they began to evolve, and as eons passed by with these corrupted Keepers still being trapped, they eventually changed so much that they resemble nothing of their former Keeper selves. Some of these corrupted Keepers gained tentacles, 3 heads, wings. These creatures were now known as the Apothecans, and they made the Shadow Man their leader, where from now on their only desire was to return to Argotha. And Dr. Monty had lost his best friend to the Dark Ether. As years and years passed by, Dr. Monty began to create life, where he created a planet called Earth. As we know, over millions of years on Earth, life was created. It began to evolve and change over hundreds of thousands, millions of years. And eventually on September the 3rd of 5 AD, knowing the planet had a gateway to Argotha, the Apothecans sent meteors of element 115 to Earth, where they believe that one day humanity will use element 115 to wage war amongst themselves, opening a rift that would allow the Apothecans to escape the Dark Ether. And that's exactly what happened. On June the 15th of 1292, humanity messed around with element 115, a rift was opened on Earth, the Apothecans entered, and the Great War between them and humanity began. But after years of fighting, once again the Apothecans were defeated, this time by Primus. The Primus heroes, along with the Keepers and humanity, defeated the Apothecans. And once they were defeated, they were banished once again back to the Dark Ether, bringing the Great War to an end. With the Shadow Man and his minion Apothecans now trapped in the Dark Ether, that was the last we heard of them, at least for a very long time. Hundreds of years later, when Group 935 were formed in 1931, as we know, Dr. Maxis invited Dr. Richtofen to join Group 935, and both of them began to work together at this group, where they worked on creating an undead zombie horde. Alongside that, creating weapons and experiments on teleportation using element 115. As we know, soon enough, not long after Richtofen started working for the group, he, along with Dr. Schuster, began working on teleportation by themselves, where Richtofen volunteered himself as a guinea pig, where he teleported himself to the moon. When he arrived at the moon, he encountered the MPD, which was a device created by the corrupted Keepers. Dr. Richtofen, upon discovery of this device, came into contact with it, he touched it, which is when it electrocuted him, and he then began to hear voices in his head. He began hearing many voices of corruption, One of those was the Shadow Man. He began to talk to Richtofen. He began to drive him insane, turning him crazy, where eventually the Shadow Man turned Richtofen into the evil doctor that we know him as. And from there, he was then teleported to Shangri-La and finally back to DeReese. And even though Richtofen had now returned back to DeReese, he was different. He was now infected by the Dark Ether. He became the Shadow Man's apprentice, where from there on out, the Shadow Man would tell Richtofen to do evil things, like experiment on Maxis's daughter, capture the test subjects Takeo, Nikolai, Dempsey and Pablo, and eventually attempt to kill Maxis and Samantha and take control of the zombies. It was the Shadow Man who was manipulating Richtofen and telling him to do all that. And that, in this timeline, was the last time we heard of the Shadow Man. Richtofen eventually took control of the zombies, the Earth was blown up, the transit crew was formed, and then finally, in Buried, as we know, you either do the Richtofen or the Maxis side of the Easter egg. The Maxis side is canon, so the evil Dr. Maxis destroys the Earth and all of its surviving inhabitants. Now in a different dimension, Dimension 63, once again on January the 15th of 1292, the Great War between humanity and the Apothicons begins, where again together with the Keepers and Primus, the Apothicons are defeated, banished back to the Dark Ether, bringing the Great War to an end. But it seems like this time, when the Apothicons were banished back to the Dark Ether, the Shadow Man somehow managed to not get banished there. It seems like the Keepers and Primus missed the Shadow Man, and somehow he wasn't banished to the Dark Ether along with the other Apothicons. I'm thinking maybe since we know that he can change form, he can change character to impersonate others, he maybe impersonated a Keeper or someone, and so because of that, the Keepers didn't realise it was the Shadow Man and left him out, meaning he was now living on Earth in Dimension 63. Or the other alternative could be he was banished to the Dark Ether, but he somehow managed to escape. Either way, now that the Shadow Man had managed to infiltrate Dimension 63, his goal was now to retrieve an artifact known as the Summoning Key, and he was going to use this in order to free the Apothicons. In order to do this though, the Shadow Man needed to use his powers to trick people into doing what he wanted, and so he took a human disguise on known as Mr. Wrapped. The Shadow Man, pretending to be Mr. Wrapped, then enlisted a reporter, where he told this reporter that he will pay him if he does whatever he wants. And the first thing he was told to do was recover artifacts from the South Pacific and Russia. One of these artifacts that the reporter recovered was the Summoning Key. Once he had this, as per Mr. Rapp's request, the reporter then spoke to Stanley Ferguson, the retired guard from Alcatraz. Stanley gave the reporter a detailed account of the deaths of Al Arlington, Billy Handsome, Finn O'Leary and Sal DeLuca, and he then reported this information back to Mr. Wrapped. For some reason, the Shadow Man wanted information about the Mob of the Dead characters. And although we don't know why, I'm thinking it's because the Shadow Man knew that Richtofen and the crew was going to go to Mob of the Dead to retrieve the blood vials, and so the Shadow Man wanted information on how he could stop this. However, once the reporter had gathered this information and returned it back to Mr. Wrapped, the reporter is then told to return to Morgue City with the Summoning Key, where once again by Mr. Wrapped he is told to do some investigating. Whilst he's in Morgue City, a meteor shower rains over the sky. The reporter notes strange mold growing all over the city. He notes most people are getting sick and acting strange. A fruit vendor tells the reporter about the ancient Order of the Keepers and how they're the only ones holding back the forces of the apocalypse. He talks of people hearing chanting from beneath the city. Once the reporter had gathered this information from Mr. Wrapped, he was then told to provide him details on 4 people. These 4 people were Nero, Jessica, Floyd, and Jack Vincent. And once the Shadow Man had this information on these 4 characters, he was then going to manipulate them. And he first off started with Nero. Pretending to be a company executive, the Shadow Man told Nero's lawyer that Nero's wife had taken a substantial loan in his name, and that Nero only had 15 days to settle this before the company seeks reparation. And so, seeing no other option, Nero killed his wife. Next, the Shadow Man poses as a film director, interested in hiring Jessica for a lead role, where he tells the producer that the part is hers. But afraid that a photographer who has pictures of her could jeopardize her chance of stardom, she asks to meet him and then kills him. The Shadow Man then moves on to Floyd, where he poses as a journalist, and he suggests to Floyd's promoter that he's a journeyman fighter. And so, wanting to guarantee his shot at the title, Floyd decides to wear brass knuckle gloves, and with these, he kills Tony King. And then finally, pretending to be an internal affairs officer, the Shadow Man tried to convince Jack, Vincent's partner, to admit that Jack plots to kill the snitch who could provide evidence against him. And so Jack kills the snitch. All 4 characters had been tricked into killing people by the Shadow Man. His plan had now begun. The only thing the Shadow Man needed now was the summoning key. And of course he'd got the reporter to bring it to him in Morgue City. But aware of the Shadow Man's actions, Monty writes a letter to the reporter warning him not to give the summoning key to anyone. He signs the letter M and it's sent to the reporter. The reporter reads this note, puts the summoning key in the back of his van inside of a crate to protect it, and decides to not to give it to Mr. Rapt or anyone else. At this same time, Richtofen arrives in Morgue City. He arrives here to collect the summoning key after he learns of its location. He learns that the reporter has the summoning key and so confronts him. The reporter waves Dr. Monty's letter at Richtofen and orders him to stay away, but he doesn't. Richtofen keeps approaching the reporter and so he attacks him. The reporter attacks Richtofen and Richtofen killed the reporter in self-defense. Richtofen stabbed him. With the reporter now dead though, Richtofen didn't exactly know where the summoning key was. He knew it was in Morgue City, he knew that it was linked to the reporter, but he didn't know exactly where he hid it. And so once again, Richtofen began searching for the key. Meanwhile, with the Shadow Man having tricked Nero, Jack, Floyd and Jessica into killing people, he was now going to use this for his plan. He knocked all 4 of them unconscious at Blake Lake Burlesque Club, and when they woke up, they were in a twisted version of Morgue City, shifted slightly from reality. Upon waking up, the Shadow Man explained to them what was going on. He told them that they are here because of the crimes they had committed, but they can escape. And in order to do that, they need to atone from their sins. That they need to listen to everything that the Shadow Man is telling them. And so all 4 characters are tricked into performing rituals, where Jessica sacrifices her producer, Jack sacrifices his partner, Floyd sacrifices his promoter, and Nero sacrifices his lawyer. After having guided them to perform rituals to retrieve gateworms, the Shadow Man finally tricked them into opening the Apothecon Rift, allowing a giant Apothecon beast to escape the Dark Ether and overshadow Morgue City. The Apothecons had now been given access to Dimension 63. The Shadow Man's plan was now fully in motion. But realizing that they'd been tricked, now realizing that the Shadow Man was in fact evil, the 4 characters then work along with the Keepers to defeat the Shadow Man, where eventually they trap him inside of the summoning key. With the Shadow Man now trapped inside of the key, just as the 4 characters are about to hand it over to the Keepers, the Primus version of Richtofen arrives out of the rift, takes the summoning key out of the Keeper's hands, and then leaves through the rift. But what Richtofen didn't know is that the Shadow Man was now trapped inside of the key. Because Richtofen wasn't there to witness this, he didn't know the Shadow Man was inside. And just as he's leaving from within the key, the Shadow Man states, "I'll be seeing you." The Apothecons then destroy Dimension 63, while Richtofen, using the summoning key, travels to Dimension 2210, collects the innocent version of Edward's soul, and then returns it to the house. And from then on out, we hear nothing of the Shadow Man, because he's trapped in the summoning key. He can't do anything. As we know, all this time, throughout the Giant, Der Eisendrache, Zetsubeno Shima, Garad Karovi, Richtofen has the summoning key in his hands, collecting the souls of the characters. The souls get sucked up inside of the summoning key, but Richtofen doesn't know that actually the Shadow Man is in there as well. And so finally, when he's collected all 4 souls of the characters and returned them to the house, Richtofen's mission is complete. All 4 souls are returned to the house and are given physical forms of children by Dr. Monty. Monty now has his perfect universe. But Dr. Maxis, who arrived in the house in the Maxis drone from Origins, he doesn't have a soul. And so the Shadow Man then uses that to his advantage. Because the Shadow Man is trapped inside of the summoning key and the summoning key is inside of the house, the Shadow Man begins to speak to Dr. Maxis. Because he doesn't have a soul, he can manipulate him. He tells Dr. Maxis to come down to the basement, pick up the summoning key, and when he does, Dr. Maxis unwittingly releases the Shadow Man. And with the Shadow Man now free, he frees the Apothecons from the Dark Ether into Monty's perfect universe. And so, as we know in Revelations for one last time, Primus, along with Dr. Monty, battle the Apothicons and the Shadow Man. In the end, the Shadow Man is defeated, Dr. Maxis and Sophia sacrifice themselves to save Monty's perfect universe, and the Shadow Man and the Apothicons are then vanquished. They are defeated. That is the end of Revelations, the end of the zombie storyline, and the end of the Shadow Man. So, there we go. That is the full story of the Shadow Man. A very detailed version. Hopefully this can understand or help you understand everything that he is involved with in the zombie storyline. If you have enjoyed, make sure you leave a like rating in the... What? Make sure you leave a like rating. These videos take a ton of time to put together and get all this information, so a simple like rating takes 2 seconds would be very much appreciated. Make sure you are subscribed if you haven't already. Just double check in case YouTube's unsubscribed you, and also click that little bell notification icon as well. Be part of the notification squad. Make sure you leave a comment, and of course I will see you all in the next video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.